All right. Good morning. My name is Will Scott with the Environmental Defense Fund, and I'm pleased to have William Bryan from the Southeast Energy Alliance here with me. So I'm the EDF Southeast Climate and Clean Energy Director, and I'm going to be interviewing William and asking him some questions about the state of play of energy efficiency in Florida. William, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Will Bryan. I'm the Director of Research at the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. We're a 501c3 nonprofit based in Atlanta, but we work across 11 southern states, including Florida, and 5 U.S. island territories. And our goal really is to use energy efficiency as a policy lever to bring about, a host of good outcomes, including more affordable housing, greenhouse gas reduction, and resilience for all sorts of communities throughout our region. And so we believe that energy efficiency is a really kind of powerful tool in the toolbox in order to do that.
And so just to start us off, could you give us a little bit of sort of a scene set? Where is Florida relative to some of the other southeastern states in terms of energy efficiency?
Yeah. So, kind of at first glance or at a high level, utility costs in Florida seem more affordable than, compared to many other states in our southern region. A 2021 study that we did found that the typical household in Florida pays about $1,900 a year for their, energy bills. And that's less than the average in the South, and that's less than the average in the United States. And we also found that the average energy burden, which is just the percentage of your income that you spend for your utility bills, the average energy burden for all households in Florida was 5%, which is lower than many southern states, and it's kind of on par with the national average, which is about 5.1%. So kind of at a glance, it's, I think things seem a little bit more affordable, but I think, one of the points that we make in that report is that, these kind of statewide averages really mask high energy burdens that are faced by many low and even moderate income households across Florida. And when we actually look at kind of the average percentage of income spent on utility bills alone for low and moderate income households is closer to 9%. And so, that kind of 5% average, I think, really masks a lot of struggles with affordability and struggles with access to assistance that can reduce household costs. And across Florida, we estimate that about 2 million low and moderate income households are at risk for energy insecurity, which really is just difficulty paying bills and maintaining vital energy services. And energy insecurity in Florida is particularly high among residents of single family homes, mobile homes, or people who reside in RVs and live in kind of the lowest income brackets. And I think that finding of 2 million households is pretty consistent with other studies recently of energy insecurity in the state, including studies commissioned by the state government. And I think kind of the big takeaway for us here is that, not only are several million people in the state struggling when it comes to affordability, but, I think this also kind of changes the narrative on climate change, which I think often is seen as simply a coastal issue, and that's particularly true in Florida. But, we have hundreds of thousands of residents who live in central or panhandle Florida who kind of are already on that knife's edge of being able to pay their bills from month to month. And, as the state heats up and as bills get higher, they're going to be in trouble and particularly vulnerable to the impacts of heat and climate change. And then I'll just kind of wrap up by sort of maybe giving a sense of assistance that's available for those households, because I think that's also kind of an important component of this equation. And I think Florida really just doesn't have as many resources to support low and moderate income households in making their homes more efficient and affordable than other states. And that includes, kind of other southern states. There was a scorecard in 2022 that kind of ranked Florida about middle of the pack when it comes to energy efficiency spending. But particularly when you look at low income spending or spending on low income energy efficiency programs. These are households that really do not have the funds to pay for a new HVAC system or insulation or building envelope upgrades. Florida really has the lowest level of spending per income qualified customer in the country at about 55 cents per customer. And that's true even in the southern region. I mean, compare that to Virginia, who spends about $15 per low income qualified or per income qualified customer in the state, or Tennessee, which pays about $6.40, or Arkansas, which pays about $5.30. So I think we've got kind of, even within other southern states, there's just greater investment across state programs. When you look at kind of all energy efficiency programs kind of across the state, there's just a lot more investment, from other states, both in terms of, per income qualified customer, and then in terms of overall spend. So I think, there's kind of two issues that really are at play. One is, there are millions of people in Florida who are struggling to afford their bills, and yet Florida really doesn't have robust resources, at least compared to other southern states, to support, those who really don't have the funds to make those upgrades themselves.
Yeah, well, thank you for that context. It sounds like, in terms of other states, Florida can maybe do more to support those who need help improving the energy efficiency of their homes. So on that note, according to your research, what are some of the best investments that Floridians can make to improve their home energy efficiency?
Yeah, well, I think I'll just start by saying I think energy efficiency is a really critical strategy for reducing energy costs and reducing the kind of greenhouse gas emission profile of housing in Florida. But at the measure level, you can get savings really through a number of ways, and talk about some of the affordability gains that are possible through these. But some of the deepest savings are available through HVAC upgrades, particularly installing ductless heat pumps, which we found could save a typical household about $980 every year on their bills. That's about $82 a month, or about half the typical utility bill in Florida. But you can also get savings from the installation of other kind of high efficiency appliances. So, for instance, high efficiency heat pumps, those are ducted heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, installing better attic insulation, smart thermostats that can kind of control the energy use of the house, and then duct sealing and insulation. All of those are ways to pretty radically reduce energy use in sort of a typical household, and with it improve the affordability of that space. And if you're looking, some of those can be quite expensive, to be honest. I mean, especially when you talk about HVAC upgrades, the initial costs can be a lot, even if you make that money back over time. So if you just want to consider the first cost, something simple like upgrading your lighting to LED lighting, or installing a smart thermostat, those can have really fast payback times. And for under $300 each, LED lighting and smart thermostats typically pay themselves back in under 2 years, just from the energy savings that you're reaping from installing those alone. And so when you consider that those costs can be further reduced through utility rebates, I mean, you're looking at very quick paybacks, and sort of easy measures that don't necessarily require the deep upgrades that maybe will bring you the kind of the more robust savings, but still can do a lot to improve affordability. And just kind of at a macro level, I think it's also helpful to think about these as systems, and sort of how they work together, and which measures can be stacked on top of each other for kind of deeper levels of savings. And when we did an analysis of kind of package level savings, we found that really the deepest savings were available through whole home electrification, combined with high efficiency components and aggressive building envelope upgrades. So for instance, that includes like installing a high efficiency heat pump, a heat pump water heater, a ventless heat pump dryer, and an induction range and electric oven. And those can very dramatically reduce energy costs in the long term. And that would be paired also with improvements to the building shell itself. So that's attic floor insulation, air and duct sealing, drill and fill wall insulation, et cetera. And so there are a lot of very deep energy cost and energy use reductions available through aggressive packages like that, but it doesn't really have to be that intensive. Our study showed that simply installing a high efficiency heat pump or a heat pump water heater can reduce energy use by like 10% from the state's baseline residential energy use if it's installed in all homes where that measure would be cost effective. And for homeowners or renters themselves, I mean, that can result in a pretty significant annual bill savings of, between $300 and $700 each year. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be a full package, although, as I think we'll probably talk about in a bit, full packages are becoming cheaper thanks to some of the federal incentives that are available.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Like as you were saying, there can be some upfront cost that then gets paid back over time. But what are some of the incentives that Floridian home and building owners are eligible for under some recent federal legislation that's passed to help support investments in energy efficiency measures?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of it. This is a moment when I would say there's really never been as much opportunity to get support on making some of these upgrades from outside sources of funding. And so, I think we're really at a critical inflection point, and there's a lot more support for making these changes than there ever has been, particularly from the federal government, and particularly from federal funding that's available through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And this funding can be used for a lot of different things. One of which is helping to pay for for measure upgrades themselves in your home. But it goes really beyond that, and it can be used for a whole host of things, both at the the level of your home, but also I think at a municipal level, at a utility level, and at a state and even regional level. So, for instance, federal funding is helping to develop energy efficiency plans that can guide funding implementation. It can be used to fuel new or existing energy efficiency programs administered by utilities, municipalities, and nonprofits, particularly those that are available for customers who don't necessarily have the upfront funds to pay for many of the things that are required to reduce their energy costs. It can provide direct rebates, as I said, that can lower the cost of upgrades. And it's also providing energy efficiency training and certification access to workers by reducing the cost of that and really kind of fueling small businesses in Florida. And finally, I'd say it's reducing the tax burden on Florida homeowners who choose to invest in energy efficiency upgrades. And I'll call out maybe one incentive that's available to all Florida homeowners that I think is really important and maybe kind of flies under the radar a bit. But this is a tax credit available from the Internal Revenue Service called the Energy Efficient Home Improvement Tax Credit. And it's basically a credit of up to $3,200 for homeowners on all qualified expenses spent as part of energy efficiency upgrades. So it really covers any of the measures that I mentioned earlier. And it's a way to, not only fund potentially, at least in part, the upgrade of appliances or building envelope technologies or a smart thermostat or any of those measures, but it's a way to get a tax credit while doing it. And like I said, it can be used for kind of energy property expenses, energy audit costs, or any improvements that have been installed since January 1st, 2023. So save those receipts if you're making changes, and you can use them to get a pretty significant tax credit in April. And this is available really for individual Florida homeowners. Energy efficiency retrofits, particularly for low and moderate income households, are two federal programs that have received much larger injections of funds recently. And so one of these programs is called the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is administered by the Department of Energy and flows through community action agencies in Florida. And then the other program is the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, which also flows through community action agencies in Florida and is really intended for bill assistance. But these programs are really the biggest sources of capital if you are income qualified and you want to reduce or manage your bills. And they're really kind of a vital stopgap for many of the households that are kind of on that knife's edge of being able to afford their bills or not. And I think, even with these injections of cash, though, it's important to note that the need really exceeds the capacity of these programs. So I think, uh, just as we think about opportunities available from the federal government, from funders, from the state, it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that while these are critical, they certainly cannot meet the need of, every one of the state's 2 million, vulnerable residents who are, potentially struggling with energy insecurity.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate what you were saying there. And one piece I wanted to draw out a little bit was, we've talked about what credits might be available to individuals. Are there opportunities for cities and municipalities under the Inflation Reduction Act to offer energy efficiency programs as well?
There are a lot of opportunities for city and municipalities, and I think we're already seeing cities, and municipalities in Florida respond to these opportunities and really, pursue them, which is terrific. I'll flag maybe a couple that I think are probably the most critical, particularly for funding some of the deep retrofits that can really reduce bills for Floridians. One is available for eligible municipalities, and it's called the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, available from DOE. And this is, kind of a bucket of funding that municipalities can apply for that can support a really wide range of energy efficiency activities. So for instance, in the things that we identify in our analysis, it can support that in a couple of ways. One is you can use some of these funds to develop, municipal energy efficiency plans to figure out kind of how you can support renters and homeowners at the municipal level in terms of upgrading their buildings, and that is true kind of in the commercial and industrial space as well. Paying for energy audits of residential buildings to prioritize upgrades, it can be used for that. It can be used to prioritize financial incentives, such as rebates or loans to help pay for energy efficiency improvements. And, it can also provide funding for nonprofit or government-led weatherization programs. So for instance, if a city wanted to stand up a weatherization program, EECBG funding could, both support it through planning, through, providing financial incentives, or even through funding kind of the weatherization work itself. So it's a really critical source of funding for Florida's municipalities. Another source of funding that I think is also really critical, particularly in a residential context as well, is a program that's available from HUD called the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. And this is specifically targeted at multifamily residences, and particularly is available to people who own multifamily buildings, but then can provide kind of cascading benefits in terms of lower energy bills through multifamily upgrades to the renters who live in these spaces. And basically, it provides grants from HUD of up to $20 million per building for efficiency improvements. And this is specifically for HUD assisted multifamily buildings. So buildings that are specifically geared for kind of low and moderate income families. And then finally, and I can talk a little bit more about this maybe as we go, but one of the kind of most significant funding opportunities that's on the horizon is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund from EPA, which is a bucket of about $27 billion that I think can be used for a wide variety of projects, including projects at the city and municipal level. And these will be, kind of competitive opportunities that are deployed essentially by CDFIs, and cities and municipalities will be able to apply for many of the same purposes like that you could use EECBG and some of these other opportunities for. But I think it's a very significant source of funding that can be used for both efficiency and renewable upgrades in Florida.
Yeah, and sort of jumping off of that, under the Inflation Reduction Act, community development financial institutions, CDFIs, are eligible for that pot of funds you mentioned. What kind of uses can CDFIs put those federal funds to?
Yeah, all sorts of things. There's really, kind of two pathways, I think, or two key pathways for these funds that the federal government is going to use to deploy them. One is called a general and low income assistance competition, and that's about $20 billion worth of funding. And that is really going to be focused on any projects that can lower energy costs for vulnerable households and decrease pollution, greenhouse gas pollution. And so, I think within that, there's a really wide range of things that could fit into that type of funding. I mean, it could provide funding, I think directly for weatherization. It could provide funding for planning. I think there's kind of a really wide range of activities, as long as it's going to result in a measurable decrease in energy costs for vulnerable households, or at least set that up. Reduce the kind of greenhouse gas emission profile of that housing. And then there's also another kind of bucket of funding, the Zero Emissions Technology Fund competition, which is about $7 billion, which is really focused on renewable energy. So whereas, the general and low income assistance competition, I think, is a little bit broader, the Zero Emissions Technology Fund, is going to focus on advancing renewable energy, but again, with a real focus on disadvantaged communities, or communities that are defined as disadvantaged by the federal government. And so, again, I think there's a lot of opportunities here to develop and deploy programs that are going to, build community solar or rooftop solar, or kind of other forms of renewable energy that can, be leveraged by communities throughout Florida. So I think these are both really, really critical sources of funding. And, I'll say, like, we're still waiting a bit on, some more details about all of these, but I think, the general takeaway is that, this general greenhouse gas reduction fund is going to be able to work for a range of energy efficiency, renewable, or weatherization type work that can dramatically address some of the affordability challenges that we see throughout Florida, particularly in low and moderate income households.
Well, it's great to hear. It sounds like there'll be room for creativity as folks are applying for that pot of funds.
Absolutely.
Speaking of creativity, Governor DeSantis vetoed planning dollars under the Inflation Reduction Act. But given that, is there still an opportunity for Florida to take advantage of some of this federal energy efficiency funding?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities, some of which we probably don't even know yet, that are still on the horizon. But even right now, I see a lot of opportunities for the state. There's a number of funding opportunities out there that can really advance energy efficiency across Florida, build the renewable energy workforce, support small businesses, that kind of thing. I think a good example of that is the DOE State and Community Energy Programs Office has announced that it's going to provide about $240 million for states, specifically geared toward improving training opportunities for contractors, to sort of help them better deliver energy efficiency and electrification upgrades. I think, there's a lot of money on the table for energy efficiency and electrification, but, one of the real issues that we're worried about is just, are there enough workers? And I think, the kind of general consensus is that there may not be, and there aren't right now. And it's a, often aging workforce, and, contractors maybe, don't have access to information about the latest technologies that are going to be included in some of these rebate programs and that kind of thing. And so this funding specifically is going to be to support the workforce in this transition, which I think is really critical to kind of opening that pipeline. And there's a couple of buckets of this funding that I just want to kind of call attention to. One is a program called the Energy Auditor Training Grant Program. And this basically offers grants to states, to pay energy auditor training fees, which can be, expensive, or to provide trainees, with lost wages so that they can go attend training. So, energy auditor training is often required to do a lot of the, kind of energy audits under kind of utility programs or federal programs. And, those are going to become, kind of even more in demand, I think, as we, roll out many of these efficiency and electrification upgrades. And so, this is a chance for potential energy auditors to basically get free training, or to get their wages paid while they are attending training, which are both, I think, really critical to encouraging more people to get those trainings that are going to be necessary to do the work. Another opportunity that's also really important is called the state-based home energy efficiency contractor training grants. Kind of a mouthful, but again, this is like formula and competitive funds for states to reduce training costs or develop, even state-based energy efficiency training opportunities and programs. And I think, all of this is just really critical because, we need to widen the pipeline so that this work can happen. And, energy efficiency job sector is a really crucial job sector made up of a lot of small businesses in Florida. And so this is a way to support small businesses and make it easier for residents to upgrade their homes. I'd say, the state also plays a really key role in kind of raising awareness of other funding opportunities, building partnerships among, the state's utilities and other stakeholders to kind of braid funding, and then, helping to understand, how we can actually stack some of these funding streams to facilitate, deeper retrofits and that kind of thing. And, I guess beyond kind of the state level, I think there's a lot of opportunities for cities, for tribal governments, and for utilities, that they can take, and many are taking, to take on a leadership role in addressing energy affordability. I think a good example is the Homes and HERA rebate programs. These are rebate programs offered through the Inflation Reduction Act, basically that cover, up to the full cost of home upgrades, particularly if you're a household making less than 80% of the area median income, and about half of the cost of any efficiency or electrification upgrades for households making, between 80 and 150% of the area median income. While the state, is, I think, still on the fence about whether it's gonna roll these out, tribal governments still are eligible to distribute, some of about $225 million in rebate funding that are available through Homes and HERA. And again, these are really crucial because they can be used to reduce the first cost of a lot of the measures that we've already talked about that, can be quite expensive, including, a rebate of $8,000 if you install an electric heat pump HVAC system, $1,750 rebate for an electric heat pump water heater, $1,600 for insulation, air sealing, ventilation. And then they can also be used for like electric appliances. So if you buy an electric stove, you could get, up to $840 in rebates. And, there are a number of other appliances covered. So, I think there's a lot of kind of creative ways that both the state, cities, municipalities, and utilities can really make, the use of this funding to really drive affordability gains for Floridians.
Well, we've covered a lot from what's available to homeowners, to municipalities, to tribes, to the state. But I want to pick up last on that piece that you mentioned there. What support do utilities need from the state in order to take advantage of all these funding opportunities and all this sort of energy efficiency potential in Florida?
Yeah, well, I'll say, utilities also have a lot of opportunities that they have never had to take advantage of funding that. And these funds can be used for a variety of things, to support planning, to fund or deploy programs, so that they don't require ratepayer dollars, or maybe not as many ratepayer dollars, and a lot more. A good example, I think, and I should note, this is, I think there are lots of opportunities, particularly for smaller utilities, electric co-ops, municipal utilities, that kind of thing in Florida, which maybe don't have the resources of some of the bigger investor-owned, utilities. So for instance, I think a good kind of example to flag here is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture actually offers loans to rural electric cooperatives, municipal utilities, and really any other entity that runs energy efficiency programs. This is something called the Rural Energy Savings Program and the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Loan Programs. And, these can be used to, support the cost of running those programs, to kind of invest in those programs and that kind of thing. And they're really, I think, crucial ways to expand, the energy efficiency offerings of these smaller utilities that still serve, a lot of Floridians and play a really important role in addressing affordability through energy efficiency. And I want to stress that all of these opportunities really can bring big benefits beyond just the funding to Florida's utilities. And one of the things that I'll point out is, increasing energy efficiency opportunities for Floridians offers utilities the ability to lower the peak load, particularly during periods of extreme heat, which are becoming more common, and can make it difficult to maintain service. And so, I think these are both funding opportunities. They are programmatic opportunities, but they're also I think real key operational opportunities for Florida's utilities. I think the state can support this in a number of ways, but primarily through facilitating connections with other stakeholders. For instance, LIHEAP and weatherization assistance, to ensure that all these retrofits, can be done in parallel and that we're not kind of working at cross purposes. And really to make sure that we're making the most effective use of these funds that we can and making them go as far as we possibly can. So that retrofits can be expensive, but not really burdensome to ratepayers or homeowners and renters. So I think, that's really kind of, from my perspective, I think the state's a key liaison in these, in connecting Florida's utilities with, with other stakeholders throughout the state who are thinking about these questions and maybe have their own programs that are operating, so that these things can work parallel and, be as efficient as possible, so that they go further.
Well, thank you, Will. I really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge about Florida and energy efficiency in Florida. I direct folks to SEIA's website, where they've done not only just good state level studies, but also regional studies to understand how the different states fit together. Just want to thank you for your time. And for folks who are interested in more, please check out SEIA's website.
Yeah, thanks so much, Will. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.